Night is honest. The desert sun cooks all the lies out of the air, and what's left is the truth of a place. Here at the Ares Gateway Complex, the biggest project in human history, my job is to walk the corridors and make sure it doesn't choke. I'm night shift security. It pays better than my old gig pulling tourists out of rip currents, and the only thing that tries to kill you out here is the boredom. Or so I thought. The gate itself, the machine that sends people to Mars in the time it takes to draw a breath, sits quiet between cycles. It's in a huge, recessed bay that looks like a concrete cathedral built for a god we haven't invented yet. People go outbound in the morning, full of purpose and government-issue protein bars. They come inbound on my shift, looking tired but whole. The system works. That's what the brass in compliance, our corporate risk division, says in their memos. Tonight, Ben Ortega was coming back. He's an electrical maintenance tech, the guy who knows the gate's moods by the harmonics in the floor plates. Before his 2-week rotation on Mars, we were burrito and bad coffee buddies. Our ritual was simple. I'd grab 2 cups from the machine in the service hall, and he'd call it Tide Sludge, a throwback to my lifeguard days. He said it tasted like the bottom of the ocean. He'd tap his knuckles twice on my cup, a little cheers without the glass, and our shift would officially begin. I was standing by that machine when he came around the corner. He looked good. Better than good. The high desert air usually leaves everyone looking like worn leather, but Ben looked rested, his skin clear, his uniform pressed like it was his first day, not the end of a long haul. He smiled, a perfect friendly smile that reached his eyes. Almost. "Malloy," he said. His voice was right, same pitch, same easy cadence. "Hey man, long ride?" I asked, holding out a steaming cup. "Felt short," he said, taking it. "Guess that's the point." His fingers brushed mine. No knuckle tap. It was a small thing, a stupid thing, but its absence was a hole in the air between us. I waited a beat, giving him a chance to remember. He just stood there, sipping the coffee. I tried again, giving him the setup line we'd used 100 times. "You still stashing those peanut bars in my locker? Or you moved on to the classy stuff?" He gave me a polite, even grin. A grin that had been manufactured somewhere and shipped to his face. It sat there waiting for my reaction. It felt like a bad connection, a signal trying to catch up with itself. "Man, you know me," he said, the words smooth and empty. "I eat whatever's around." My own smile felt stiff. The real Ben would have called me out, said he'd upgraded to caviar, or asked if I'd finally cleaned out the old gym socks he swore I kept in there. The real Ben would have remembered the nickname he had for his own daughter. A stupid, silly thing he'd told me once after 3 beers. I had a sudden ice-cold urge to ask him what it was. I didn't. A test that big, you only run when you're sure you want the answer. "Yeah," I said, taking a half step back. "You do." He just nodded, his eyes scanning the corridor like he was reading a manual. I watched him. His posture was perfect. He stood without the slightest weight shift, no lean, no restless rock from one foot to the other. People don't stand like that. People are messy. We sway. We fidget. We exist in a constant state of falling and catching ourselves. Ben stood like a statue someone had put down in the middle of the hallway. He was a perfect copy of my friend, but he was missing the scratches and dents that made him real. He finished his coffee in 2 more swallows and dropped the cup into the recycler, a motion as neat as folding a letter. "Good to be back," he said, his smile returning, just as polite and just as late as the first one. "Everything is normal." He walked off down the corridor, footsteps steady enough to lull the air around him. I stayed there for a full minute, my own coffee growing cold in my hand. Then I walked to a quiet intersection, pulled the small, flip-bound notebook from my breast pocket, and clicked my pen. On a fresh page, I wrote the date, the time, and a single word in clean block letters: vacancy. Back in the security hub, my job was to watch the facility's glass eyes, the hundreds of cameras that covered nearly every corridor and room. On a slow night, it's a good way to stay awake, tracing the patrol routes of the other guards, watching the maintenance carts drift by like silent ghosts. Tonight, I was hunting. I pulled up the archives for camera 113A, the one aimed down the service corridor near the mess. I spooled through the footage until I found Ben, and there he was. He'd walked out of my sight and a minute later stopped in the middle of that empty hall, and he stood. He didn't check his device. He didn't lean against the wall. He didn't pace. He just stood there, facing a blank concrete wall, perfectly centered in the frame. The time code in the corner of the screen crawled forward, 0214, 0230, 0305. Cleaning carts zipped past him. Another tech walked by, nodding to Ben, who returned the gesture with a slight, precise tilt of his head before resuming his perfect stillness. He was a rock in a river of distorted motion. He held that same posture, without a single visible weight shift, until 5:18 in the morning. 3 hours and 4 minutes. Human bodies aren't built for that. It's a trick of physics and biology we can't pull off. Try it. Your body can manage perfect stillness for maybe 10 minutes if you're disciplined. After 30, it's a constant, conscious fight against the sway. After an hour, it's pretty much impossible. Your body is always in a quiet conversation with gravity. You can't just hang up the phone. When things don't make sense, you hide behind the forms. I opened a new incident report on my terminal. I was careful with the language, keeping it objective. I typed in the date, the camera designation, the timestamps. Under description I wrote, Subject Ben Ortega, ID 774B, observed stationary in a fixed posture for a duration of 3 hours and 4 minutes. Subject exhibited no discernible micro-movements or postural adjustments consistent with standard human idle stance. No signs of distress were apparent. Routine activities continued unobstructed in the corridor. I attached the video file, flagged it for my shift lead's review, and hit send. I printed a hard copy and walked it over to Michael Rourke's desk. He's my shift lead, a man who has been working nights for so long he looks like he was carved out of moonlight and vending machine coffee. He took the paper without looking up. His eyes scanned the report, then scanned it again. A long, weary sigh escaped him. It wasn't a sigh of disbelief. It was a sigh of exhaustion, the kind of sound a man makes when he's just been handed a problem he knows won't have a simple solution. Okay, Malloy. He initialed the corner. I'll file it. He didn't ask if Ben was okay. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just took the paper, another piece of strangeness to be fed into the machine. He didn't look surprised. That was almost worse. The next day, just before my shift, a calendar invite popped up on my device. Meeting regarding IR 9345. The sender was Caleb Brooks, compliance analyst. The location was the compliance suite on the 3rd floor. Compliance analysts are the people who make sure the story stays straight. They handle incident reports that involve personnel, smoothing out the language, managing risk, and making sure our multi-billion-dollar project looks safe and stable to the people who sign the checks. A meeting with them meant my report had been flagged as a problem. Caleb's office was quiet and cold. The only personal touch was a single, obsessively perfect succulent sitting in the exact center of his desk. He greeted me with a professional smile. "Ryan, thanks for coming in. Please have a seat." He didn't waste time. He swiped his finger across a tablet on the desk, turning it to face me. My incident report was on the screen, but it was different. It was covered in red lines and green text. My words had been operated on. "I've made a few small adjustments to your report," Caleb said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Just for clarity and to align with post-transit wellness protocols. Same substance, just gentler framing. We don't want to pathologize a colleague who just completed a demanding transit cycle." I read the new version. My sentence, the one about no discernible micro-movements, was gone. It had been replaced. Subject observed in extended rest in a low-stimulus posture. My carefully noted duration of 3 hours and 4 minutes was still there, but now it had a note beside it. Consistent with post-transit fatigue. The entire report had been skillfully transformed from an observation of something inhuman into a wellness note about a tired employee. "He stood still for 3 hours, Caleb," I said. Caleb nodded, his smile unwavering. "Language, Ryan. Stood still can be interpreted as accusatory. What you saw was a man recovering. Rested in a low-stimulus posture is a kinder, more accurate description of the event from a human factors perspective. See? It's about supporting our people." He slid the tablet closer to me. A box at the bottom glowed, waiting for my digital signature. All I had to do was press my thumb to the screen. I would be supporting my tired colleague. I would be a team player. My report would be filed, and the strangeness would be buried in a server farm under a mountain of bland, helpful words. I looked at the revised text, at the lie sitting there so neatly. Then I looked at Caleb, his friendly, reasonable face waiting patiently. He wasn't a liar. He was worse. He was a translator. He took uncomfortable truths and changed them into harmless noise. Signing it meant I agreed with his translation. It meant the thing I saw with my own eyes didn't happen. I pushed the tablet back toward him, careful not to let my finger touch the screen. "I can't sign that," I said. Caleb's smile didn't fade, but it changed shape. The warmth fell out of it. It wasn't friendly anymore, it was diagnostic. He was looking at me now like I was another variance that needed to be minimized. "I see," he said. "Thank you for your time, Ryan. We'll be in touch." Walking out of Caleb's office felt like surfacing from a deep dive. The system wasn't broken. It was working perfectly, and its job was to absorb inconvenient facts. My report had been a meal. Now the system knew my taste, and it would be ready for me next time. I was on my own. Except, maybe not entirely. On the night shift, there are two kinds of people. The ones who count the hours until they can leave, and the ones who have learned to live in the quiet. Omar Haddad was the second kind. He was the overnight facilities tech, the man with the keys and the mop. I used to call him the ghost of the third shift, and one night he'd overheard me. He stopped his floor buffer and said, his voice soft but clear, "I am not a ghost. I am the map." I never called him that again. He saw things no one else did. The scuff marks that told him who was running and who was walking. The specific kind of dust that meant a filter was about to fail. The way a room felt just before something went wrong. I found him in a service junction, methodically organizing maintenance supplies. His cart was parked nearby, its contents arranged with the precision of a surgeon's tray. "Omar." He turned, his movements unhurried. "Malloy." I wasn't going to show him my notebook. I wasn't going to talk about vacancies or tide sludge. I was going to talk about geometry. I need to know how someone stands, for a long time. I need to see the proof of it on the floor. He looked at me, his dark eyes taking in my face, my posture, the tension in my shoulders. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask who. He just gave a slow nod. "The floor knows that," he said, "if you prepare it to listen." An hour later, we were in corridor 113A, the place where Ben had stood his vigil. Omar worked with the still precision of someone threading a needle. He took out a piece of chalk, the kind linemen use, and scraped a line, no thicker than a fingernail, in the grout between two floor tiles. He placed it just back from a camera seam, a spot that would be in shadow from the overhead lights. Then he got his buffer. He laid down a specific thin layer of wax, giving the concrete a slick, mirror-like finish. "It will hold any story it is told," he whispered. For the rest of my shift, I watched camera 113A. The corridor was empty for hours. Then, just after 4 in the morning, Ben appeared. He walked into the frame and stopped. From my monitor, I could see his shoes were perfectly aligned with Omar's hidden mark. He stood. He didn't move, not an inch. The seconds turned into minutes. I didn't wait for 3 hours this time. The test wasn't about duration. It was about impact. After an hour, Ben turned and walked away. A few minutes later, Omar's cart rolled into view. I left the security hub and met him in the hall. He didn't say a word. He just tilted the buffer pad on his machine toward me. It was a circular felt pad, usually covered in a chaos of smudges, black scuff marks and grey smears after a job. This one was different. It was mostly clean, except for one spot. There, in the fine grey dust the buffer had picked up from the surrounding area, was a perfect, unbroken, concentric ring. It was the exact outline of a shoe's sole. A single, perfect print, with no smudging at the edges, no arcs or smears. "A man sways," Omar said, his finger tracing a line in the air. "His weight shifts, heel to toe, side to side. It makes an arc, a smudge, a mess." He tapped the buffer pad. This is a post. A weight that came straight down and went straight up. It did not live there, it was just placed. I stared at the ring. It was more damning than 1,000 hours of video footage. Caleb could rephrase my words. He could call my observations observer fatigue, but he couldn't talk his way out of this. It was physics. It was proof. A receipt for a transaction I couldn't explain, written in dust on a floor no one else ever looked at. I had my case. It wasn't a theory anymore. The concentric ring on the buffer pad was my Rosetta Stone. It translated a feeling into a fact. Zero sway was the baseline, the entry point for what was wrong with Ben. Now I needed to map the rest of the malfunction. If the new Ben was a machine, he'd have other tells, other programming flaws I could find if I created the right tests. I started carrying my notebook everywhere, jotting down every interaction, every conversation, turning casual encounters into controlled experiments. My first real test was for memory. Not the kind of stuff you can read in a file, but the lived-in, evolving memory of a place. Last week, the access panel on the west conduit, a notorious piece of junk we both used to kick regularly, had finally been replaced. The new one slid open with a whisper. I caught Ben near the junction, heading that way. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. "You heading to the west conduit? Give that access panel on 3 a good kick for me. Thing's still sticking." The real Ben would have corrected me. He'd have been glad the damn thing was finally fixed. The Ben standing in front of me just nodded, his expression one of complete, untroubled confidence. "Yeah, panel 3, he confirmed smoothly. "Always a pain. I'll give it a knock." He didn't know it was fixed. His knowledge of the building was frozen at the moment he'd stepped into the gate 2 weeks ago. He was accessing an old file, a cached version of the world. In my notebook, I drew a small clock face next to his name and wrote 2 words: timestamp lock. The next test was for processing. I found him on the diagnostics mezzanine, the glassed-in walkway that overlooks the gate floor. He was watching the engineers run a cold cycle, his posture predictably perfect. I stood beside him. "Looks like they're still getting harmonic feedback on coil 4, I said, pointing. He started to reply, his mouth forming the words. "The schematics suggest..." At that exact moment, a pre-scheduled announcement came over the facility's intercom. "Attention, night shift. Atmospheric scrubbers will activate in 10 minutes. Please secure all open containers." A normal person would stumble over their words, pause and grimace at the interruption, or just talk over it. Ben did none of those things. He just stopped. It was a hard stop, like a film freezing in a projector. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes fixed on the coil below, but their focus seemed to blur for a half-second. It was a pause so empty it felt like a hole in the universe. When the announcement ended, his face cleared, and he resumed his sentence at the exact syllable he'd left off. That the issue is resonance, not power draw. He didn't acknowledge the interruption at all. It was as if it hadn't happened in his world. It was a computer, blue screening for a microsecond because it couldn't handle two audio inputs at once. I made another entry in the notebook. Script lag. That night, Omar found me. He just appeared at the door of the security hub, a silent figure in the doorway. His face, usually calm, was tight with something I hadn't seen before. "You should come to the waste dock," he said. The waste docks are at the far end of the facility, a concrete bay where we stage everything for disposal, from old machine parts to biohazards from the medical lab. Omar led me to a specific sealed container, the one designated for waste from the gate's staging airlock. Inside was a clear bag, and inside the bag was something bizarre. It was a small collection of what looked like shed skin, but it was all wrong. Instead of random flakes, these were thin, translucent films, some several inches long, all bizarrely uniform in thickness. They were pinkish, crisscrossed with thread-like patterns that weren't veins. There were no pores, no hair follicles. It was like the residue a snake leaves behind, but it wasn't from anything that had ever drawn a natural breath. It smelled of ethanol and sweet metal, like pennies clutched in a sweaty fist. "This is from after a heavy return cycle," Omar said. "I find it every time now, only after an inbound transit." He prodded the bag with a gloved finger. One of the films dissolved slightly at the touch, becoming tacky. "I put solvent on a piece earlier. It dissolved. Skin doesn't do that." I stared at the bag, connecting the dots. Zero sway, timestamp lock, script lag, and now this, physical waste. I thought of Ben's flawless skin, how rested he looked. It wasn't just that he was wrong inside his head. He was wrong all the way through. He was manufactured. And like any machine, he required maintenance. He shed parts. He left behind waste. "We need to log this." I grabbed a hazmat sample kit from a nearby locker. We documented the chain of custody, Omar and I both signing our names. I submitted the sample to the on-site medical lab, filing it under unidentified biological substance. I knew what would happen. The sample would be logged, it would be put in a freezer, and it would never be analyzed because the system wasn't designed to find problems like this. It was designed to ignore them. But now, I had the record. And in my notebook, under the other entries, I added a new one. Calibration waste. My list of inhuman tells was growing, and so was the knot of certainty in my gut that we were sharing the building with things that only looked like our friends. The report on the calibration waste vanished. I got a confirmation email that the sample was received by medical, logged as unidentified substance, and nothing. A week went by. No follow-up questions, no lab results. My formal, documented evidence had been dropped into a black hole. When I asked Rourke about it, he just shook his head. "It's with medical, Ryan. That's their lane." He wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. The system was digesting my facts, turning them into inert data. I was running out of lanes. There was a journalist I knew back in Oceanside, a guy named Miller, who owed me a favor after I'd fished his kid out of a nasty rip current a few years back. He was tenacious and didn't trust people in suits. If I could get the story outside the walls of this place, it would be harder to bury. The problem was the walls. Personal devices are forbidden past the main entrance, stored in lockers. The only option was a landline. On the night shift, the security hub is a tomb. I picked up the receiver of the desk phone. It had an off-site access line, a feature mostly used by day shift supervisors. I dialed Miller's number from memory. It rang once, then a sharp click, followed by a low hum. It wasn't a busy signal or a disconnect warning. It was just empty air, held on a perfect, repeating loop. I hung up and tried again, same thing. One ring, a click, and then the sound of nothing going nowhere. It was the most deliberate dead end I'd ever heard. I needed to see the wire. That meant I needed Ethan Doyle. Ethan is one of the network engineers who keeps the digital heart of this place beating. He works nights because he hates meetings. His office is a closet crammed with servers, smelling of stale energy drinks. He lives in a world of pure data, and he trusts it more than he trusts people. I found him hunched over a terminal, a spiderweb of colored cables spilling from an open panel at his feet. "Ethan, I need a trace." He glanced up, his eyes bloodshot behind thick glasses. "Security issue?" "I think so. An outgoing call from the hub desk line isn't connecting. Feels weird. Can you see where the signal is going?" I kept it simple, procedural, a potential system flaw. He gave a non-committal grunt. A schematic of the facility's comms network bloomed on his screen. He initiated the trace. I watched a bright green dot travel from a node labeled SEEK Hub, arc toward the edge of the diagram marked External Gateway, and then, just before it reached the edge, it hooked. It turned back on itself like a fishhook, traveled along a different path, and terminated in a small box labeled Internal Operator. "Well, there's your problem," Ethan said, pointing a grimy finger at the screen. "Your call never left the building. All non-executive off-site lines are being routed to an internal switchboard. Looks like it's managed by compliance." He didn't seem surprised, just professionally annoyed at the clumsy architecture. "They're screening calls. I was in a box, and I'd just learned that the windows were painted on. What else? What else is lying?" Ethan leaned back, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes now. "What do you mean?" "The cameras," I said. "The analytics. I filed a report about a guy standing still for 3 hours. The system never flagged it. It should have. Linger time anomaly. That's a basic alert." He was quiet for a long moment, chewing on his lip. The gears were turning. If they were faking the phones, what else were they faking? He turned back to his terminal. "Let's look at the analytics source code," he murmured. He pulled up walls of text that were meaningless to me. He scrolled, his eyes scanning, then he stopped. He leaned closer to the screen. "Oh, hell," he breathed. He highlighted a single section of code. It was a list of conditional statements. Most of them were standard security protocols, but near the bottom was a block under the heading Biometric Flag Override Protocol. It was a list of employee ID numbers. Each one was followed by a simple command: anomaly flag equals ignore. "It's a whitelist," Ethan said, his voice flat with disbelief. "If a camera's AI detects anomalous behavior from someone on this list, erratic movement, extended stillness, accessing restricted areas, the system is programmed to ignore it. It logs the event as nominal. It actively lies." I scanned the list of numbers, and there it was. 774B, Ben Ortega. The very infrastructure of this place, the digital eyes and ears I relied on, had been ordered to look the other way. The building itself was a co-conspirator. The cameras weren't for security. They were for an audience, and I was the only one watching who hadn't been given a script. Knowing the system was rigged changed the game. My evidence was useless if the official record was designed to contradict it. Caleb was curating reality, and now that he knew I wouldn't sign his version of it, he started applying pressure in more insidious ways. It began with a memo. A new post-transit dialogue guideline was circulated to all staff. It was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism, full of phrases like cognitive harmony and reducing reintegration friction. The bottom line was simple. We were now forbidden from asking returnees any open-ended or personal questions for 72 hours after their arrival. All conversations were to be strictly operational. It was a direct shot at my methods, a policy designed to keep the masks from cracking. It was Ben's law, and Caleb Brooks was its author. Then came the wellness checks. I started getting mandatory 15-minute appointments scheduled in the middle of my shift. I'd trudge up to the compliance suite, where a wellness counselor, someone I'd never seen before, with kind eyes and a clipboard, would ask me about my sleep schedule, my stress levels, if I was feeling isolated on the night shift. They were fishing, trying to build a case that I was unstable, an unreliable narrator. I gave them polite, short answers. Yes, I was sleeping fine. No, my stress levels were manageable. The wellness checks were part of the file they were building on me, the one that would explain away everything I'd seen. The most dangerous change was to my patrol. Rourke called me into his office. "Malloy, compliance has flagged your recent incident reports for pattern analysis. They're concerned about observer fatigue. They're reassigning your patrol routes, putting you on the outer loop for a while. Less interaction." He was also assigning me a new partner. His name was Harris. He'd returned from Mars a month before Ben. His personnel file was immaculate. He smiled pleasantly, did his job with an ease that never drew attention to itself, and never, ever swayed when he stood still. I was being put in a box with one of them, isolated from the rest of the night crew, my every move monitored by a polite, perfect copy. The system was actively trying to gaslight me into submission. I knew I was running out of time. They were either going to fire me or break me. My quiet, one-on-one tests weren't enough. I couldn't fight a rigged system from the shadows. The only way to beat a lie that big was to expose it to a bigger truth. I needed to create an event that couldn't be erased by a memo or buried in a wellness file. That's when Caleb made his move. He convened a formal variance review panel. It was my last chance, he said, to present my concerns through official channels. The meeting was a kangaroo court. It was held in a small, soundproofed conference room. Rourke was there, looking miserable. A woman from Human Resources was there, looking bored, and Caleb was there, looking compassionate. They brought Ben in. He sat across from me, calm and composed. Caleb conducted the interview himself, his voice gentle and leading. He only asked questions that had simple, factual answers. "Ben, could you confirm your arrival date?" "October 22nd, Ben answered, his voice clear. "And your primary duties on the Martian colony?" "Maintenance of the primary power grid, sectors 1 through 4. He was flawless. Under the tightly controlled script of Caleb's questions, he was a model employee. My logs of script lag and timestamp lock were meaningless here. There was no room for spontaneity, no chance to introduce a chaotic variable. "Ryan," Caleb said, turning to me, his expression one of deep sympathy. "We appreciate your diligence, but as you can see, Ben is fine. He's healthy. He's performing his duties. The review board has analyzed your reports in conjunction with Ben's performance metrics and medical records." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle in the quiet room. "The consensus is that what you've been documenting is a textbook case of observer fatigue, compounded by the known stressors of night shift work." He closed a folder on the table in front of him. "The review is concluded. We're recommending a temporary reduction in your patrol hours and an extended series of wellness sessions for your own health." I looked at Ben. He was smiling at me, a pleasant, empty, supportive smile. And in that moment, the last of my fear burned away, leaving behind something cold and hard. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried me in paperwork. But they'd made a mistake. They'd let me get this close to one of them, in a room where they thought they controlled everything. They thought the test was over. They didn't realize I was just about to start a new one. I looked directly at Ben, my voice low but carrying across the small table. He was a perfect portrait of a colleague, calm and professional. I was about to vandalize it. "What did you call Maya's stomp dance?" I asked. The silence in the room was absolute. Ben blinked. The pleasant mask on his face didn't slip, but a flicker of cognitive disconnect, a search for a file that wasn't there, happened behind his eyes. The real Ben, the man who had shown me a clumsy cell phone video of his daughter stomping around their living room in a dinosaur hoodie, would have laughed instantly. This Ben recovered with programmed smoothness. "Your daughter's dance?" he asked, his tone one of polite inquiry. He mirrored my phrasing perfectly. "I appreciate your concern, Ryan." "Not mine," I said, my voice flat and cold. "Yours." The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Rourke shifted in his seat. The woman from HR finally looked up from her datapad. Ben's smile didn't falter. It reset. It was like watching a screen refresh. The manufactured pleasantness was wiped clean and came back exactly as it was before, empty and perfect. "Let's keep to the checklist," he said, the words as clean as the room. That was it. The confirmation, the final, undeniable proof. He didn't know the nickname because it wasn't in his file. It was a memory spoken between two friends over cheap beer, not an entry in a database. I tore my eyes from the thing wearing Ben's face and looked at Caleb. His own smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure, cold fury. He knew what I had just done. I had taken his controlled environment and proven, in front of witnesses, that the man he was defending was hollow. The meeting in Caleb's office left a scar. They had built a wall of wellness checks and observer fatigue around me. Playing by their rules was a losing game. The only way to win was to burn the rulebook in front of an audience. I found Ethan in his server room. He was tracing a fault in a data conduit, but he looked up when I entered. He'd seen the whitewashed report from the review panel. He knew they had called me a liar. "I need a bigger room. I need everyone to see what I see at the same time." Ethan stopped what he was doing. He knew what I was asking for. He gnawed on his lower lip for a moment, then turned to his console. "I can get you a feed. There's a maintenance window for the comm server tonight at 3 a.m. I can patch a camera feed to every monitor in the break rooms and common areas. It will look like a facility-wide safety bulletin. I can hold it open for 5 minutes, maybe 6, before the system flags the override and shuts me down." Next, I found Omar polishing the floors in the East Common area, a large, open space where the day and night shifts often crossed over. I didn't have to explain the plan. He saw the look on my face. "The floor here is new," he said. "It will show everything." He gestured to a tall, rolling maintenance floodlight parked in a corner. "And the light here is strong. It hurts the eyes. A man must turn away." The last piece was Rourke. I needed his signature. I found him in the security hub, staring into a coffee cup like he was trying to read the future in the grounds. "Rourke, I need to schedule a safety drill," I said, handing him a digital form. "A live glare compliance check for the East Common area. Just a 5-minute test during shift overlap. We'll test the new maintenance floods, make sure they don't violate OSHA regs for direct line-of-sight exposure. It's proactive. Looks good on the quarterly safety review." I was using their language, their love of procedure, as a weapon. He read the form, his expression weary. He knew I was up to something, but the request was textbook bureaucracy. Denying it would raise more questions than approving it. He sighed, the sound of a man choosing the path of least resistance. "Fine, Malloy, 5 minutes, and you file the report before sunrise." At 2:45 a.m, the East Common was filled with the murmur of the shift change. Omar had done his work. The floor gleamed under the standard lighting. A single, almost invisible chalk tick mark sat on the floor in the center of the room. The powerful maintenance floodlight was positioned a dozen feet away, aimed at that mark but currently switched off. I saw Ethan give me a subtle nod from across the room. I saw Ben walk in, heading for the coffee machine. Perfect. "Ben?" I called out, my voice casual. "Got a second? Need your help with a quick safety check." He turned, his smile immediate and pleasant. "Of course, Ryan. Happy to help." He walked over and I positioned him on Omar's mark, facing the unlit floodlight. At that moment, Ethan hit the switch. Every monitor in the common area and in the break rooms across the facility flickered to life. Our faces, Ben's and mine, were suddenly broadcast across the building. The murmur in the room died down. I started simple. Timestamp lock. "Hey, I heard they swapped out the protein bars in the vending machine again. You try the new sun-dried tomato one?" A normal person would say yes, no, or that sounds disgusting. Ben's internal database searched for an answer based on 2-week-old information. "No," he said smoothly. "They still have the jalapeno cheese flavor, though. That's my favorite." The jalapeno cheese bars had been discontinued last week. A few people in the room, snack food connoisseurs of the night shift, exchanged glances. Next, script lag. I nodded to 2 other guards I'd prepped, a guy named Dave and a young woman named Lisa. They walked up on either side of Ben. "Hey Ben, did you file the power coil report?" Dave asked. Simultaneously, Lisa asked, "Ben, is it true they're changing the holiday rotation?" Ben froze. It was the same dead-air pause from the mezzanine, but this time it was happening in front of 60 people. He didn't try to answer one, or ask them to repeat, or get flustered. He just stopped, his brain a processor unable to handle 2 simultaneous, unscripted queries. After a full 2 seconds of absolute silence, his smile reset. "Let's stick to the safety check," he said. The crowd was dead quiet now. This was the final piece. I pointed at the floor. "Look at his feet," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "He hasn't moved, not an inch." People looked. They saw his boots, planted perfectly on the nearly invisible mark. They had all been standing here for minutes, shifting, rocking on their heels. Ben was a statue. Then I gestured to his face. "Now look at his eyes." Omar, on cue, switched the floodlight on. It was blindingly bright. People in the room flinched, squinted, and turned away. I took a step out of the beam. Ben stood in the full glare, his eyes wide open. He didn't squint. He didn't raise a hand to shield his face. He didn't even blink for 10 seconds, then 15. His pupils, caught in the harsh light, constricted to pinpricks, but his stare never wavered. He was a machine, tolerating a hostile input. The room erupted in whispers. The spell was broken. "What the hell is this?" a voice boomed. Caleb Brooks strode into the room, his face a facade that barely held back the storm. He motioned to shut off the feed. "Everyone, please. What you're experiencing is a simple synchronization lag. It resolves. Let's give our colleague his privacy." But it was too late. The lie was too thin to cover what everyone had just seen. Omar stepped forward. He stood on the mark. He did not sway. Ethan spoke up from the back. The broadcast was live and unedited. Rourke pushed through the crowd. He looked from Ben's unblinking face to Caleb's furious one, and then at the dozens of his own staff staring. He was a man of procedure, and the procedure had just failed in the most public way possible. He made a choice. "Seal this area," he commanded, his voice shaking slightly but firm. "Nobody in or out. I want statements from everyone present. This is now an active investigation." The broadcast feed cut out. But the image of the man who didn't blink, the man who didn't sway, was burned into the memory of every person in the room. The secret was out of my notebook, and it was screaming. The public exposure bought me less than a day. The system's immune response was swift and wrapped in the language of human resources. An email appeared on my device the next afternoon. It was a formal notice, flagged as urgent. The subject line read, "Mandatory personnel reassignment, critical operational need." The text was polite, impersonal, and absolute. Due to my exemplary performance record and experience with high-stress environments, I had been selected for a priority rotation to the Martian colony. My transfer was scheduled for the next outbound cycle, tomorrow morning. The last line was a masterstroke of corporate language, both encouraging and deeply sinister. "We look forward to your contributions in supporting the Ares Prime Colony. Your outbound processing will commence at 0700 hours. Outbound processing, a one-way trip. There was no mention of a return date. I was being executed by memo. They were going to put me through the gate, and the person who stepped out on Mars, if anyone stepped out at all, wouldn't be me. I was being replaced, the ultimate solution for a man who had gotten too good at spotting replacements. That night, my last night, the air in the complex felt thin, like it was being stretched to its breaking point. I was walking the outer perimeter, a ghost on my own farewell tour, when Omar found me. He just materialized from the shadows of a loading bay. He was holding a small folded rag in his hand. "They have made you a kit, Ryan." He unfolded the rag. Inside was a small brass key, the kind used for old service lockers. "Supply closet 4C behind the reserve oxygen tanks. You should see it." I found the closet. It was supposed to be empty, a space for overflow supplies. Tucked in the back, behind a rack of dusty canisters, was a standard-issue personnel duffel bag. It looked brand new. My name, Ryan Christopher Malloy, was stenciled on the side in fresh white letters. I unzipped the bag. Inside, folded with perfect military precision, was a new uniform in my size. Beneath it was a datapad, preloaded with credentials, work orders, and a complete personnel file. A perfect, clean copy of my professional life. They had everything ready. All they needed was for me to step through the gate, and they could slot my replacement in without a single ripple. I left the bag where it was and went to find Ethan. He was in his server room, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. He already knew about my reassignment. The news had spread through the night shift like a virus. "They're going to do it," I said. "They have the replacement ready to go." Ethan's face hardened. "Then we give them a reason not to." He turned to his main console. "I can't stop them from putting you on that transport, but I can make sure they regret it." For the next hour, we worked. We built a weapon out of data. We created a single encrypted file, a poison pill for the entire Ares project. Into it, we poured everything. My unedited incident reports, the raw, time-stamped camera clip of Ben's 3-hour vigil, Omar's crystal-clear photo of the concentric dust ring on the buffer pad, the logs of the strange calibration waste, and the crown jewel, Ethan's own network diagrams, showing the rerouted phone lines and the hidden biometric whitelist, complete with highlighted ID numbers. We added a cover letter, naming every person involved, from Caleb Brooks down to the HR drone who signed my transfer notice. Ethan wrote a simple, elegant script. "It's a dead man's switch," he explained. He pointed to a line of code. "The trigger is your badge. The moment it clears the final scanner for outbound processing, this script executes. It will send the entire package, unencrypted, to every single employee in this facility." And, he added, a grim smile touching his lips, "to the oversight committees at the Department of Energy and the 3 biggest news agencies on my contact list. The moment they push you through, the entire world knows. It becomes weather. They can't stop it." My final move was to load the gun and show it to the right person. I found Rourke in the hub, finalizing the morning shift assignments. "Rourke, you need to know something. Before I go to outbound processing tomorrow, I've made an arrangement." I explained the data package. I told him about the dead man's switch. I made it clear that it was automated, unstoppable, and that his name, as the shift lead who signed off on the initial reports, was in the cover letter. I wasn't threatening him. I was informing him of a fact. "If I go through that gate," I finished, "this entire world gets a full unedited copy of everything that's happened here. The lie gets very, very loud. You have until 7 in the morning to decide if that's a price the project is willing to pay." His weary resignation was gone, replaced by the hunted look of a man who had just been checkmated. He was trapped between a corporate execution and a public crucifixion. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The hours after my ultimatum to Rourke were the longest of my life. I walked my final patrol loops, the facility now a death row clock counting down the seconds. At 6 in the morning, the day shift started to filter in, their faces fresh, their coffee hot. They moved with the easy energy of people who believed they had a future. I stood near the main corridor, feeling like a ghost already, watching them badge in. My shift was over. My life, officially, was scheduled to be next. I felt the gravitational pull of the outbound staging area, a place I had no intention of going. At 6:51, my device buzzed. It was a single system-generated notification, an automated alert from the HR management system. Update, personnel reassignment cancelled. Transfer order 881G has been rescinded due to a clerical error in the priority scheduling matrix. Please disregard previous notifications. We apologize for any inconvenience. Clerical error. 2 words to paper over a nuclear standoff. They had blinked. I felt a wave of relief so sharp and sudden it almost brought me to my knees. I was alive. I hadn't been erased. 2 days after my cancelled transfer, Rourke summoned me to his office. Corporate has initiated a formal inquiry, he began, his voice stripped of all emotion. He slid a datapad across the desk. It's not an investigation, it's a quality assurance review. Their words. I read the directive. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. The public incident was framed as a breakdown in post-transit wellness protocols. My cancelled reassignment wasn't mentioned. The goal of the review was to identify and rectify procedural shortfalls to enhance crew member reintegration. And, as a concession to the undeniable facts I had leveraged, all inbound cycles from Mars were officially paused, pending the review's findings. Rourke tapped a line on the screen. I've been assigned to lead the review panel, and due to your unique perspective on recent events, compliance has mandated that you serve as my primary consultant. A consultant. It was a cage built from respectful language. They couldn't fire me and they couldn't send me away. So they were absorbing me. They were putting me inside the machine, giving me a title and a leash, forcing me to play a part in their carefully stage-managed cleanup. If I refused, I was insubordinate. If I participated, I was complicit. So I'm helping you write the report that says I was just tired. You're helping me document what we find, Rourke corrected, his eyes meeting mine. The forms are from compliance, but the observations will be ours. And so began the audit. For a week, Rourke and I worked our way through the list of personnel who had returned in the last 3 months. It was a clinical process. We'd call them into a quiet observation room, one by one. Omar's chalk marks and floor wax were replaced by calibrated pressure plates and high-resolution cameras. But the tests were the same. My tests. The first was a geologist named Jennings, a man with a booming laugh I remembered from the mess hall. He sat across from us, smiling pleasantly. "Jennings," Rourke began, his voice stiff as he read from the compliance-approved script. "Can you stand up for a moment? We're just calibrating the room's environmental sensors." Jennings stood. We watched the monitor displaying the output from the pressure plates under his feet. For the first minute, the graph showed a chaotic scribble of micro-adjustments. Human sway. Then the machine in his eyes seemed to stutter. The scribbles on the screen flattened into 2 perfect, unwavering lines. He had locked into zero sway. He stood like a piece of furniture, a polite smile fixed on his face, while the graph printed a flat line of inhuman stillness for 6 straight minutes. Rourke made a note on his datapad. Next came the timestamp lock. "I was reading your team's latest mineralogy report before you left," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "That new vein of iron oxide you found in the southern caldera looked promising." "It was," Jennings said, his response immediate and confident. "High concentration, a major find for the colony's long-term resource plan." It was the perfect answer, except for one detail. 3 days after Jennings had left Mars, the colony's geologists had published a follow-up analysis. The iron oxide was actually a worthless deposit of hematite with microbial contamination. It was a bust. I watched the vacancy behind his eyes, the smooth delivery of outdated facts. It was like talking to a recording. We went through 8 more returnees. 7 of them failed the tests in the same ways. They were polite. They were helpful. Their paperwork was perfect. But they were all running on old software. Each time Rourke would log the results. Time-stamped video clips were attached. Graphs of pressure plate readings were appended. By the end of the week, we had a stack of digital reports that formed a single, undeniable conclusion. Late on the final day, Rourke sealed the last file. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of a man who had followed procedure all the way to the edge of an abyss. He had seen what I had seen. His own disciplined, methodical process had forced him to document the impossible. It's done. He pressed his thumb to the datapad, his digital signature locking the final audit summary. The report is filed. It's on its way to Brooks. He had done his duty. He had taken my chaotic observations and laundered them through the official channels, turning them into hard, procedural facts. The evidence was now part of the system's permanent record, and the ball was back in Caleb's court. The audit report vanished into the corporate machine, and for 3 days, the only response was silence. The inbound gate remained paused, a monument to our temporary victory. We had handed the system a meticulously documented monster, and we waited to see if they would kill it or try to tame it. The answer came in the quiet, methodical restructuring of our lives. Omar was the first. He was reassigned from the gate corridors to the outer administrative wings. His official reason was personnel optimization. The real reason was clear. His eyes had seen too much, and his mop had cleaned up too many inconvenient truths. He was being moved away from the evidence. Then came Ethan. His network admin privileges were curtailed, rerouted through a new supervisory approval system. He was a master locksmith who'd had his keys taken away. They weren't fired, they were contained, muted. On the 4th day, I was summoned by Caleb Brooks. The meeting was in the main briefing room, the one reserved for project milestones. Rourke was already there, sitting ramrod straight. Caleb stood at the front of the room next to a large display screen. He looked rested and confident. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice calm and appreciative. "I've reviewed your audit findings. I want to commend you both. The quality of the data is exemplary. This is exactly the kind of robust, proactive analysis this project needs." He was praising us. This wasn't the prelude to a shutdown, this was the prelude to a rebranding. "Your work has allowed us to identify a previously unclassified condition we are calling post-transit dissociative variance." Caleb continued, the words rolling off his tongue as if he'd practiced them for weeks. A slide appeared on the screen behind him, with PTDV in large, friendly letters. It's a severe but thankfully rare neurological side effect of the dematerialization-rematerialization process. The subject retains core memories and functions, but experiences a temporary loss of, let's call it idiosyncratic personality and fine motor expression. Your zero sway and timestamp lock phenomena are its primary diagnostic markers. He had taken our horror story and turned it into a medical diagnosis. He wasn't denying the evidence. He was giving it a new, manageable name. "Our duty of care is paramount," Caleb said, his face a picture of corporate concern. "Therefore, effective immediately, we are implementing a new screening protocol for all returning personnel. We need a rigorous, repeatable method to identify cases of PTDV before they become a risk to the individual or the team." He clicked to the next slide. The title read, Malloy, Rourke, Variance Indicators. Below it was a numbered list. Postural Stability Test, PST. Chronological Memory Verification, CMV. Cognitive Load Response, CLR. He had taken my work, my observations, and turned it into a checklist. He had absorbed my rebellion and was turning it into procedure. He was naming it after me, making me the father of the very system that would now codify the lie. "Your methods, Ryan, will become the new standard," Caleb finished, looking directly at me. "You've given us the tools to manage this. We are all in your debt." I left the meeting in a daze. The war was over. I hadn't lost. I had been assimilated. An hour later, a new standardized form appeared on my datapad. It was the PTDV screening checklist. My job, my new permanent role, was to oversee its implementation. I sat there in the quiet of the security hub, the document glowing on the screen. The inbound gate would remain paused for now. Ben was still on site, still walking the halls, now officially classified as a PTDV case pending long-term observation. The system was safe. The colony on Mars would continue to be supplied. The great project would go on. I pulled my old notebook from my pocket. I opened it to the first page, to the single word: vacancy. Then I looked back at the screen, at the clean corporate language. I picked up a stylus and began to translate my raw notes into the numbered lines of the form. Zero sway became the postural stability test. Timestamp lock became chronological memory verification. I added my own notes at the bottom, detailing the exact methods for each test, making them impossible to misinterpret. I was writing the operating manual for seeing the monsters. It was the only part of the truth I could save. I had won. The facility no longer accepted new returns without running my tests. But every time I saw Ben smile his empty smile, I knew the real horror wasn't just that the people who came back were wrong. It was that the system had found a way to call them right. And my own name was now signed at the bottom of the page. Months have passed. My title is Senior Transit Monitor, a meaningless string of words created by compliance. My office is the glassed-in observation mezzanine overlooking the gate floor. I don't walk patrols anymore. I watch. The inbound cycles started again last month, slowly at first, under the new protocols, my protocols. Every person who steps out of the staging airlock is a potential patient, and every one of them is my responsibility. From my perch, I can see the whole theatre. I see Rourke on the floor below, his posture rigid, his face permanently etched with the strain of enforcing a truth he knows is a lie. I sometimes catch a glimpse of Omar, sweeping the corridors in the distant administrative wing, his back always turned to the gate, a quiet exile in our new, safer world. We don't talk anymore. There's nothing left to say that isn't already written on a form. Today's a heavy cycle. A group of 5 engineers returns. They walk into the observation bay looking tired and relieved. They are smiling. They always are. The screening begins. My checklist, the Malloy-Rourke variance indicators, glows on my console. The irony of my name on it is a dull ache I no longer feel. It's just a tool. I watch them perform the postural stability test. 4 of them sway, their bodies making the messy dance with gravity. The 5th, a woman named Anya Sharma, does not. She plants her feet, and on my screen, the pressure graph flattens into a dead straight line. 0 sway. It's as clear and unmistakable as a signature. My gaze drifts to the other side of the bay. Ben is there. He's part of the new process now too. He's a control subject, brought in to help calibrate the sensors. He performs simple tasks, moving equipment from one spot to another. He looks up and sees me in the window. He smiles and gives a small, friendly wave. I don't wave back. I just make a note on my datapad. Control subject exhibiting nominal behavioral patterns. I turn back to the screening. It's time for the chronological memory verification. I watch as Rourke asks Sharma a simple, time-sensitive question about a recent software patch. She answers with perfect confidence, giving the details for the version that was active when she left. Her answer is 3 weeks out of date. Another box checked. I don't need to see the rest. I know the diagnosis. I pull up her file. In the field marked assessment, I type the letters. PTDV. In the field marked recommendation, I type the prescribed phrase, subject to be moved to long-term observation and assigned to low-impact operational duties. I hit send. The file disappears, routed to the departments that will now manage Anya Sharma's life. She will not go home to her family. She will be given a new room, a new schedule, a new purpose. She will be cared for. She will not be a monster, but a patient. The system will hold her and keep her quiet. I look down at the gate, humming with power, ready for the next outbound cycle. It wasn't a doorway to Mars. It was a factory. I didn't shut it down. I just became its quality inspector. I traded the truth for a manageable lie, and the price was a piece of my soul. My name is on the form that sanitizes the horror. The system is working perfectly,